Okay. Right. Great. Yes. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for having me at this workshop. Today, I'm going to be talking about some of the work that we do in my lab at the Department of Materials Science, so just down the road from Cape, on functional nanomaterials and devices for energy sensing, energy and sensing in wearable applications. So I decided to highlight wearable applications, to fit into the into this workshop in particular. So before I start, just to introduce myself, here we are. I lead an interdisciplinary, multifaceted research group that works at the interface of material science, device engineering, and biomedicine. So I'm a physicist by training, and I'm really fortunate to get to work with a talented and dedicated group of individuals with backgrounds in chemistry, material science, engineering, and biology. And together we tackle challenges in the energy and sensor fields. Particularly using cross-disciplinary approaches. So here is my fantastic group from over a year ago, actually. This is quite an old photograph now when we could all sit next to each other. These days, of course, you're more likely to find us in this form like everyone else. We look forward to when we can be together again, but till then, we've continued to keep busy. Right, so in my group, a major focus area is how to facilitate personalized medicine that is tailored for the individual patient, to improve clinical outcomes and quality of life, reducing burden on healthcare systems. I'm sure this audience is already well familiar with the challenges. So obviously we want to come up with ways by which we can monitor remotely physiological signals in real time via epidermal or home use biosensors that provide actionable feedback for treatment and intervention. So a lot of the biomedical sensors that are out there provide quantitative data, but this is done via reliance on chemical, electrochemical, or optical methods of detection that can often be quite complex and time-consuming. So we're interested in delivering a new class of point-of-care biomedical devices that rely on electrical signals arising from biological processes, and the intention is to make these possibly self-powered through energy harvested from the body. And so this is basically what this figure here is trying to represent. So we're looking at devices that can analyze body fluids such as saliva, which was mentioned earlier on, sweat or interstitial fluids. And we're doing this in collaboration with our with my colleague in Exeter, Jahangir Kama, who actually used to be in Cambridge in the physics department. I'm also interested in looking at analyzing body forces. So this could be for gait analysis. I'll touch on some of this in this talk, and this is in collaboration with Vikas Kanduja, who's an orthopedic surgeon at Addenbrooke's, and also Jahangir. Body sound analysis, and this is very useful for particularly for diagnosing and for the treatment of cardiovascular and respiratory diseases. So I'm working closely with Anurag Agarwal from engineering here in Cambridge on developing wearable integrated stethoscopes. And finally, we work with a group in Poland on looking at ways by which we can harvest body energy, so mechanical energy from body movement, to power possibly some of these devices. So what we're one of the ways we sort of bring functionality to devices is by integrating functional nanomaterials using additive manufacturing techniques. In particular, in my group, we use a method called aerosol jet printing, which allows us to build up devices that are functional, of course. So basically, they're responsive, they can do something, or they can harvest energy, for instance. But at the same time, these devices are flexible, they're conformable and stretchable, all of which are useful, or all of which we would like to have in a wearable device. So I won't go into too much detail here. We do have quite a few publications where the aerosol jet printing technique is discussed in great detail. So if you'd like to dig deeper and learn more, I've left a few references there. So basically the inks that we work with, the inks that we can print, a lot of times we develop these ourselves, like I said, based on the functionality that we're interested. These could be nanoparticulate dispersions, they could be polymers, they can even be biological materials. So by careful selection of inks, one can impart a range of functionalities to these devices, including making them freestanding and stretchable. Again, these are great to have for a wearable device. So here's just an example of a typical conformable strain sensor. So this is actually a printed device, which we have then sort of lifted off the substrate. So it's now freestanding. As you can see on the left here, you can stretch this up to, well, you can actually stretch it up to all the way to 200%, as you can see on the right, where we're plotting the resistance as a function of the strain. At a certain point, obviously, the device breaks, but till that point, the resistance scales quite linearly with extension. So you can use this as a conformable strain sensor. And importantly, you can grow, you can deposit various layers of different materials within the same. So let me just find my highlighter here and I can kind of show you what I mean. So for instance, here we have an LED, which is a 2-terminal device, and you can see it's connected with this sort of freestanding stretchable wire. But that's just a single wire, and this is a 2-terminal device. So actually what it is, it's built up. There are actually multiple layers. So we do have conducting layers, which are a silver and elastomeric substrate mix. And in between, we've actually interdispersed insulators. So actually, in this SEM figure here, you can kind of see the cross section. So we have multiple layers of different materials within the same stack, which allows us to do this. So this is actually quite interesting because this feature makes single wire circuitry possible by reducing the level of design complexity for practical stretching applications. And remember, even while you stretch, it still retains its conductivity, which is great. So I'll show you an example here. Let me see if I can get this to work. So this is a demonstration of a conformable tactile sensor. Let me just move this video along. So as you touch the sensor part of the device, you produce a signal in response. But the important thing is that because of the sort of wiring that we've used, even when you bend the finger, the sensor still works. Now, as I said, you can build in multiple functionalities. So for instance, if you use a porous dielectric, we've actually shown this in this particular paper, then this becomes a humidity sensor. So at the same time, you can work out, for instance, how much sweat there is. This can also be made into a temperature sensor because some of the materials that we use have a temperature dependence on their electrical properties. So coming back to my slides, here we are. I'm going to switch gear a little bit, but still on the subject of using additive manufacturing to introduce functionality. Here, we're going to try to introduce functionality into microfluidic devices, which again, probably a lot of you are familiar with. These devices, of course, you can analyze small quantities of fluid. You can use them for drug screening or for looking for particular markers of disease. Again, most of these devices require an optical readout, or they're dependent on some electrochemistry in order to give you a readout. So what we're interested in here is to functionalize the devices themselves, make them active, and to integrate electrical circuitry so that we can do away with the need for needing a microscope or a centralized facility. So the goal is to move towards sort of home use or self-administered sensors. So it's really this last block down here. So it's to improve functionality that is what we're trying to achieve here by introducing functional materials directly into the microfluidic channels and to integrate these with electrical circuitry. And the way we do this is using actually the aerosol jet printing method. So in this particular work, we described for the first time how aerosol jet printing can be used for rapid prototyping of microfluidic devices with versatile geometries and precise channel functionalization. So the alternative, so if you use lithographic methods to make these kinds of devices, they can be quite time consuming, quite expensive, whereas we're able to kind of change up the device, the geometry, the number of channels, whatever you want over the span of a few hours in the afternoon, which makes this really, really powerful and a really great way to rapidly look at a bunch of different devices. And importantly, because basically what we're doing is with the aerosol jet printer, we're depositing the mold, we can put onto the mold a bunch of other sort of functional materials which will make the channel active, and we can underlay this with electrodes. So I'll give you an example here. And this kind of shows you the strength of this technique. So here we've actually managed to fabricate conformable microfluidic force sensors using this method. So the idea is to integrate interdigitated electrodes within the microfluidic channel such that when a force is applied, let me get my pointer, so that when a force is applied to the fluid reservoir, the fluid is pushed up through this channel, and the higher the force, the further the fluid travels, and this changes the capacitance of the underlying electrodes. And in fact, this change with respect to the force is actually quite linear. So the other thing to note is that we can make this really conformable, very flexible, so it can fit into all sorts of tight spaces. Here's just a video kind of showing you what I described. So yeah, you apply a force, fluid moves, and you're able to calibrate this quite accurately. So what makes this sort of different from other force sensors? Well, for one, we can tailor the geometry of the device such that it can actually measure very large forces. And how large? They can measure forces that the body exerts on them. So here in this video, we kind of show you just different parts of the sensor. And in a second, we'll show you how this technology can be used for on-the-go gait analysis. So you can see that these sensors, they're really small, flexible. You can put a lot of them, like up to 12, 15 of them within a shoe insole, just a standard shoe insole. And you can use this for quantitative force measurement. So you can really work out where your foot is applying pressure while walking, running, So for so these kinds of sensors might help in identifying joint conditions early on. GSK mentioned women's health. So for instance, osteoarthritis, indeed any arthritic condition can be identified from gait quite early on. Usually this involves coming into a gait lab and you've got cameras trained on you, etc. Whereas this could be something that you can sort of wear on a daily basis and gather data as you go along. So you can get very accurate readings of the exact pressure distribution from these types of sensors. And the same force sensor can be used for other force sensing applications. So here we use it as a finger force sensor. So let me just skip ahead to the bit where it's important. Yeah, useful. So here we've sort of mounted one of these sensors, as you can see, onto a finger cot, and it's connected through a wireless transceiver. And as you can see, when you apply force to an object, you can monitor this sort of wirelessly on your mobile device, which again might be quite useful for rehabilitation, post-surgery maybe, or for other kind of haptic applications. And further down, I'll just show you this other video. We can also sort of hook this up with a robotic arm. So you can see here that the robot clamp is following the gesture. So we've got a sensor on the cup on the left, and as force is being applied, this force is being measured and being relayed to the robotic clamp. So you can really start to now combine these sensing and also actuation functions using these types of sensors. So speaking of actuation, I mean, we saw lots of very beautiful actuators in the previous talk. Just to throw one in here, so this is actually something that we've been developing. These are printed iron polymer metal composite actuators that we've been developing in the lab. And so the idea is, again, using this printer, we can pattern these to make different shapes, etc. The voltages that we use here are, typically you can power these using a battery. So a 9-volt battery is more than enough to get this level of actuation. And so we want to be able to combine these with the sensors that we're developing for applications in say, soft robotics. But just moving on quickly, these sensors have applications also in orthopedic surgery and telemetry. So there's a clinical need for sensors, particularly in the hip joint. So when the hip joint is being replaced, the implant is positioned based on the surgeon's skill, and because there are no sort of quantitative or objective force measurements, if the implant isn't positioned correctly, then there is a chance that a good fraction of these might require revision surgery. And so, given the number, so you can see some statistics here on the left, given the number of joint replacement surgeries in the UK alone and the percentage that need to come back for revision, and also the fact that there are younger and younger patients that are coming in for these surgeries. It's no longer sort of, an old age condition. There are people much younger requiring these surgeries. And so there's a requirement for these sensors to last longer. So here is another example of where our devices fit in quite nicely. Again, remember I said these are conformable force sensors and they can measure large forces. The forces going through your hips are, many times the body weight. And so you need sensors that are not just thin and conformable, but that are capable of measuring these sorts of large forces. And so what we've done is we've started designing these sensors to fit into the trial components that surgeons use during So they use these trial components to test for fit, etc. And so this is where we've been putting in our sensors. And here's just a tabletop demonstration of how this works. So if you look down here, we've got one of these, they're called acetabular cups with these sensors loaded, and now we have a femoral head. So this is sort of the thigh, the thigh bone part of the implant, and you can see that as you apply a force, you can sort of monitor the distribution of that force, and this will help guide precision positioning of these sorts of items. And yeah, just to say that sorry? Oh. And just to say that we've recently spun out for a company from the university that seeks to commercialize these novel conformable force sensors for applications in orthopedic surgery, in sports medicine, and beyond. And then just while on the subject of microfluidic sensors, just to say that these can also be extended to electrical detection of proteins, antibodies, or biomarkers. Unfortunately, I can't say very much about this at this stage, but just to say that these graphs that I show you on the right are purely electrical signals which correlate with the amount of, say, antibodies or particular biomarker that we're interested in. There's no optical detection, there are no electrochemical cells involved. And so this is also another, we're quite excited about this because it could mean that you can decentralize the process of analyzing a lot of these fluids, either be it for drug screening or for screening for disease markers or other biomarkers indeed. And finally, I'll just, because I said, we're interested in energy harvesting, just a quick a few slides on how we're developing smart textiles, which can harvest body energy and which can hopefully power some of the sensors, some of these wearable sensors that I've been talking about. So if you're familiar with Triboelectric generators, you already know what I'm talking about, but if not, I'll just give you a very quick demonstration. So I'll actually skip ahead. So the idea is that we have two dissimilar materials. So for instance, here, hang on just a second, let me just skip ahead. Yeah, so if you have two dissimilar materials, when you rub them together, there can be charge transfer that takes place between the two. And this is what we, in daily life, it's what we call static, right? So you can harness this. You can actually pick materials, you can pick one that is more likely to donate electrons, one that is more likely to accept electrons. And when you bring these together, there's charge transfer that takes place. And by electrostatic induction, you can actually cause a flow of current through an external circuit, as you'll see in a second. So we're just sort of tapping Kapton and I think it was copper, and you can see that you could generate enough electricity to light up a bunch of LEDs. And this is basically the effect. I just wanted to introduce what the triboelectric effect is. And as I said, there's an empirical series, so you can rank materials sort of based on how tribopositive they are, how tribonegative they are. You want to kind of pick materials at extreme ends and bring them together for the maximum charge transfer. So how does this translate to textiles? Well, recently we fabricated what are known as triboelectric yarn. So basically we electrospun, so we coated fibers of these triboelectric materials onto carbon nanotube conducting cores. So you can see sort of what they look like. Actually, in the next image, you can have some nicer images. So yeah, on the top left, you can see the core is basically your carbon nanotube conducting core, and it is surrounded by basically these electrospun these electrospun fibers. In this case, this is nylon 11, and you can sort of make these into actual sort of microscopic fibers that you can handle. And the nice thing is that when you tap on these, when you rub them, they produce electricity, which through the conducting core you can harness. So I'll show you how we actually make like a patch. This is just one of the first ones that we came up with. So we've woven two triboelectric yarns. So one is nylon, which is already a material used in textile. The other is a polymer called polyvinylidene fluoride. And the idea is, so we've got these two different triboelectric materials, and as they rub against each other, so imagine you're wearing clothes, they're rubbing against each other, you can produce power. In fact, we've measured across an impedance match load a power density of about in the order of 20 microwatts per centimeter square. You can harvest this energy, charge up a bunch of capacitors, store that energy to do useful work. You can build up a self-powered wearable sensor. So as you can see, the voltage that you produce scales with the force. And so, you can have like almost a touchpad. So for a more immersive experience, you can, you saw some examples of controlling the phone through electronics on your skin. You can do it straight off your clothes using these types of triboelectric sensors. So I think I'm going to end there. I'll just leave you with this slide. There's actually a whole bunch of other things we do in the lab that I haven't been able to touch on. Speaking of energy harvesting, we've been developing these flexible thermal energy harvesters to harvest body heat, which again might be useful for wearable applications. We also develop platform devices which integrate, which cell biologists can use because they sort of interface rather functional nanomaterials with cells themselves. And of course, we do a lot of scanning probe microscopy to understand the fundamental nature of the materials that we work with. So I'll stop there. Again, I'd like to end just by acknowledging my fantastic group for their hard work, for their efforts. Do check out more of our work on our website or via Twitter. And finally, of course, I'd like to acknowledge our funders. So yeah, that's it for me, a little bit a whirlwind tour, but I'd be happy to take any questions now or later.
Thank you, Sohini. Thank you very much. Are there any questions? You can either unmute yourselves and ask a question or post it in the chat. Are there any questions for Sohini?
I have a question about maybe the pressure sensors. So I was wondering how these compare to sort of more conventional architectures. For example, you got the squishy sort of pyramids, or maybe the sort of Electrospun meshes pressure sensor. Do you have a specific advantage, or you see like a specific maybe type of application where these based on the entrapped liquid capacitance sensors?
Yeah, so yes, I think you're referring to the microfluidic pressure sensors.
Yeah.
Yes, so one of the that particular sensor was born out of a conversation that we had with the orthopedic surgeon that we work with, Vikas. And so the requirement was for a sensor that was thin and conformable that could fit into a tight space, so basically that hip joint, but which at the same time could measure these forces. And I'm talking about up to kilonewtons of forces that go through these hip joints. So that was sort of the, we had a very specific target. So there are sensors that are thin, that are flexible, that are soft, but they don't necessarily measure a kilonewton of force. And so this is where the, this particular technology kind of has an edge, I guess, over the others. And this is also why you can put them in your shoes, you can step around. I work with piezoelectric materials as well, but with those, of course, there are polymers that are flexible, etc. But between the two, these seem to have a more versatile range. If that answers.
I mean, it was a great talk. Yeah, thanks very much for that. Thank you.
Sohini, there is one question on the in the chat with respect to the rapid prototype microfluidics. What scale structures can be produced?
Right. So the aerosol jet printer can print features down to 10 microns. So if you want a channel size down to 10 microns, we can do that. In terms of how big you can go, we have an area which is 15 centimeters by 15 centimeters. So we can fill that up quite easily, if that's the question that you had. The other thing is we can also sort of build 3D devices. So if space is your constraint, we can actually make 3D microfluidic devices so that you kind of you're making use of the third dimension rather than putting everything onto a planar substrate.
Very exciting capabilities. Thank you, Sohini. Thank you very much. If there are any more questions, please post them in the chat.